Will we finally get to find out what happened to those three little boys in West Memphis back in 1993? So the update has to do with the DNA testing. So Damien Eccles has been trying to get DNA testing done on the evidence in this case so that people can find out once and for all who it is that is responsible for the murder of those three little boys in West Memphis. Now, he was denied. So Damien Eccles has been trying to get the evidence tested in this case for a long time. First, it seems like they said that the evidence didn't exist anymore, like it had been destroyed or something. Then the evidence was located, but a judge denied getting the testing done. That denial was on the basis that Damien Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly, and Jason Baldwin were no longer in prison, but they weren't in prison for the case anymore because they accepted an Alford plea for the case, meaning that they had to admit that there was enough evidence to possibly convict them of the crime so that they could get out of prison, because otherwise, Damien Eccles was on death row for this crime. Damien Eccles posted to social media today, "The Arkansas Supreme Court has ruled in our favor. Further DNA testing is to be allowed. Hopefully, this will allow us to solve the case once and for all. Thank you to everyone who has supported us for the past 31 years. I'll keep you posted as things move forward." Now, I know that there are people who still believe that Damien Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly, and Jason Baldwin are very much so guilty of the crime of murdering those three little boys. But here's what I think about it. So Jason, Damien, and Jesse, they've all accepted an Alford plea. They're going to be felons forever. They've gone on with their lives by and large, right? They could not ever address this case ever again, and people will believe what they believe. A lot of people believe they're innocent. A lot of, some people still believe that they're guilty. They don't have to try to get the DNA testing. He doesn't have to do that. I feel like if you were guilty of a crime, but so many people believed that you were innocent, I think in my mind that I would just leave it alone. But instead, he's trying to get DNA testing done so that not only can they be declared finally innocent of this crime, but that will help justice for Stephen Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers' families that still have no closure in this case. They've said that the evidence didn't exist anymore, and Damien could have accepted that response and been like, okay, peace out, I'm going on with my life. But he didn't. Instead, he has fought and fought and fought for justice for these three little boys as well as himself, because you have to admit at this point in time that justice for Damien, Jason, and Jesse is also justice for Stephen, Michael, and Christopher. They are interlaced, and there can't be justice for one without there being justice for the other. This doesn't make any sense to me that Damien Eccles would be trying to get the evidence tested if they were in fact guilty. It doesn't make sense to me at all. So just briefly about the crime, on May 5th, 1993, the three little 8-year-olds, Stephen Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were riding their bikes. They were seen by neighbors out riding their bikes around 6:30 p.m. These three boys were friends, and they were often seen playing together. So they were playing together that day, and they just disappeared. They didn't come home on time, and the neighborhood went out and started looking for them. The boys' bodies were eventually found in a major drainage canal in Robin Hood Hills. Now, the three boys were found stripped naked. They were hogtied with their own shoelaces. So Jesse Miss Kelly, Damien Eccles, and Jason Baldwin were all arrested for this crime. Now, Jesse Miss Kelly went on trial first, and Jesse Miss Kelly did have people that testified in his favor, like a professor of sociology from UC Berkeley testified that Jesse Miss Kelly's interrogation was a classic example of police coercion, which should have been known because Jesse Miss Kelly testified that stuff happened that was proven that it didn't happen, like that the boys were raped. And the reason I say it should have been known that that is exactly what happened is because the police did initially believe that the boys had been raped. So So, with police believing that, and then Jesse Misskelley says in his interrogation that that happened, but it's later found out that that did not happen at all. It seems like a classic example of 2 + 2 = 4. It has to be that the reason he said that is because the police told him that. But Jesse Misskelley was convicted of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life plus 40 years in prison. Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin went on trial together, which I think now would never happen because a big part of the case against Damian Eccles in the state's mind was the occult. They believed that this crime happened as part of a ritual, like human sacrifice. So Damien and Jason were both convicted. Now, Damien, who was the only adult at the time of the crime, was sentenced to death, and Jason Baldwin was sentenced to life in prison. These three guys were not ever going to leave prison. And so much has came up in the time since these boys were convicted, like there was a witness that recanted. DNA testing was, new. It's come so far in since 1993. There was accusations of jury misconduct. So in 2011, the three now men, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Misskelley, had the opportunity to, as part of a plea deal, accept an Alford plea. Now, the reason that this happened was quite controversial, right? So Damian Eccles was on death row, and he could have been executed for this crime in all those years that he spent on death row. Jason, I don't think, wanted to accept the Alford plea. He didn't want to ever say that he was guilty because he said he wasn't guilty. But they went ahead and accepted the Alford plea so that they could leave prison because, like I said, they were going to die in that prison. Now, as part of this plea deal, the state of Arkansas cannot be sued by Damian Eccles, Jesse Misskelley, or Jason Baldwin for false imprisonment. So even if, I guess, I'm assuming that even if they're proven to actually factually not be guilty of the crime, they can never sue for all those years that they spent in prison, which in my mind is such an Arkansas thing to do. The state of Arkansas as a whole does not like to admit that they're wrong, ever. They would have never wanted to admit that they falsely accused and convicted these three teenagers. But with the Alford plea, they didn't have to. They didn't have to ever admit that they falsely accused and convicted these three teenagers because they accepted an Alford plea, except for now, there's going to be DNA testing. And hopefully, we will find out who it is that was responsible for the murder of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. So, what is your opinion on this case, and how do you feel about the fact that this DNA testing is going to be finally happening?